everyone, and welcome back to the latest in the award-winning OnBase podcast series. I'm your host, Paul Gibson, and with brand being big topics in 2025, I'm excited that today I'm talking with Bee Patel, Global Marketing Communications Director at AlphaSights, and today we're discussing reimagining brand ownership. Bee, I'm excited to get you on this show. Thanks for coming to join us.
Thank you for having me.
Obviously, this is a great topic and very interesting for the listeners. But before we get started, if you don't mind, simple question. Can you walk us through your journey to where you are today and what particularly inspired you for this topic?
Yeah. So in terms of my journey, I have to sit here and pause for a second because, gosh, it's been so many years. But I've been leading global marketing strategy now for probably, just coming up to 16, 17 years, right? So a long time. And it hasn't changed a great deal, but my main focus has been how do you convert reputation into results? Right. When I first started out this journey, it was all about, the visuals, the colors, the logos, but very quickly, I've transitioned and shifted into a position throughout my tenure where we can translate branding, reputation, credibility, how a firm uses their authority to ultimately create measurable business outcomes. So that's been my journey. I've worked across a number of technology organizations and then currently working with a professional services firm.
Excellent. Well, brilliant. As I say, it's great to have you on the show. So let's dig into the main subject then. I suppose a good way to start is brand ownership and shared brand ownership is something that probably is talked about quite a lot at the moment, maybe more now than ever. What's at stake, would you say, for organizations if they don't adapt? And why do you think it matters so much today?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. I think gone are the days when brand ownership was essentially something that sat with just marketing and it became a marketing deliverable. Today, the brand is an experience that touches multiple teams across, the organization, as well as a lot of external touch points. So I do think if you're unable to develop ownership across teams, it'll become extremely siloed and quite redundant quickly. And given that we are operating in a very fierce environment where, there is competition out there and you do have to stand out from the crowd, I think it's important for ownership to sit across the likes of HR, where you're embedding the brand values, the mission, why we're all here today across, each and every employee, right through to how product then develop content and marketing material out into the field and sharing with clients.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And we're all brand ambassadors in our business. It's like I always say, everyone in the business is a salesperson. If they're having a conversation about a business and how they come across and how the brand comes across is so important for everyone. So it makes a lot of sense. And what do you think are the biggest shifts you've noticed as brands move from being controlled by that one team to a shared responsibility across multiple different functions?
Yeah, I would say, it's a shift that I've heard a lot talked about, but probably less in action yet. The first one, and probably the only one I'll talk about today, is brand moving from what's historically been viewed as, and I've had multiple conversations at board level around, an awareness tool. Yes, let's go and build, an identity market. Let's support top of funnel activity. And the shift I am seeing today, and it's something I am actively working on with our enablement team here at AlphaSights, but also across the board with sales, is leveraging brand to increase, yes, awareness, reputation, but also supporting everything from lead generation right down to close rates. Because ultimately we live in a world where trust is the currency, and building a strong, reputable, consistent brand is now becoming a game changer in how quickly you can generate and convert and close leads. So I do think there is a shift there, both in perception from business leaders, but also in the results.
Yeah, big believer of that. And a lot of the stuff that OnBase does is around getting early insight on who's in market. And just because you see someone starting to show signs, that's not the time to give it to sales, right? That is the time to give it to marketing to start to get that trust, which is all around the brand side of things. And that works all the way through the process. And I don't think salespeople ever get to speak to everyone on the buyer committee, right? So how do you ensure that the people you're not speaking to are also getting the feeling that you're the company they should work with? These are the reasons why. And it's all down to the marketing team getting that brand and that awareness and that trust across the buying committee, whether you know them or you don't. So 100% in agreement with that. So when you look at it then, how do teams like, say, HR or product and comms, how do they work together to actively shape the brand? Can you share any examples where the contributions those different teams have made have had a real tangible impact?
Yeah, so if I take myself back to my time at Insight, so large Fortune 500 reseller, now solutions integrator. When I joined them about 3 or 4 years in, we decided to transition from, sort of a typical transactional reseller through to a solutions integrator. And that was an exciting project, but one where it was a collaborative effort with the likes of HR, product, and ultimately, sales had to drive that forward as well on the front lines. With HR, it was working with them really to collaborate on how we connect and have our employees engage with the new brand story, our mission, and also just revisiting the values. What do they mean today in this new solutions marketplace? It was collaborating with them on the likes of, internal engagement programs, and even just communications initiatives. And then in terms of results on that front with HR, it was then measuring against some of our employee engagement scores, more in the way of like clarity on business mission, vision, how connected do they feel with the organization, how transparent do they feel leaders are being. And that was our opportunity to really start to open up dialogue and those communication channels as to why we were making the shift, because ultimately no one likes change, but then how they were part of that journey. So that was HR's role. With product, it was, they were the enablers of bringing our story to life across, marketing collateral. So it was working closely with them to collaborate and produce stories of successes we'd already kind of secured early on. Leveraging their expertise to craft really compelling proof points that then the team and I would activate both internally and externally on channels. And we did actually see I'd say, casting my mind back, I think it was around a third, so maybe 33% increase in content engagement very early on in the first 6 months of that brand transformation. And also one metric that doesn't always get measured is, the spike in the number of solution-based RFPs that we saw coming in. And I remember that moment because the RFP team, there were only 3 folks and we were inundated with, requests for these pitch decks. So the team and I also jumped in to help them there. And then finally sales, these are our frontliners. These are the ones, these are folks that, had to be the most confident in delivering our new brand narrative and actually understanding the actual proposition. So it ranged from running, kind of company office-wide workshops right through to really tailored enablement sessions. And as a result, we were able to build traction in that market very quickly and also build a lot of confidence in sales folks who didn't really understand why we were bringing this new proposition to market.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And any metric that's 30% plus increase is obviously really powerful. We have some
Yes.
interesting discussions actually, because everything we do is B2B based, right? And most of those B2B companies have a set industry or niche or region or size of business that they work with. And so raising your brand profile outside of that, does it make sense or not? And where that comes in is you talk about the measurement of brand effectiveness. If you're getting lots of clicks on your ad campaigns and you're getting people coming to your website, but actually they're not people that you can sell to, is that a positive sign or is that just a false positive? And if I was a company that was selling technology into financial institutions and I had a lot of success getting retailers clicking on my ads and coming to my website and getting into pipeline, that's on surface is great, but it's not stuff that sales can ever sell. So it then becomes you're filling the pipeline up with stuff that they can't sell. Do you ever see anything like that, or is that a discussion you have at all? Or
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen that. I would say a good example would be back in, so when I joined 8x8, I joined them in the midst of the world kind of going down into lockdown essentially with COVID. And at that stage, we had a big focus on supporting SMBs. In fact, we were supporting everyone, right? We wanted all businesses out there. So, 8x8 essentially they're a cloud communications provider. And so we were an element, right? We were like, this is our time now to essentially tell the world how great our platform is. And actually they have to use it. And so for us, a lot of the campaign work that I was focused on within 3 months of joining them was very much around enabling your small businesses. So I would say, 50 seats plus right up to your large enterprises that weren't necessarily on that cloud journey as of yet. And so there was a range of activity that we had to quickly deploy, everything from ads through to, sales, actually getting on the phone and speaking to folks. And we did often attract one-man bands, right? Because there were a lot of those small businesses out there. And we really didn't have a proposition, nor was it profitable for us to be able to continue selling to them. So we have seen that trend in that space. Now, to answer your question, I think there's a lot you can glean from it. So one is kind of rethinking your proposition. If there is so much interest from a market that perhaps you haven't considered, is it worth going back to the table and figuring out, okay, how do we build, sitting down with your solutions team and figuring out, how do we make this work for retail? How do we make this work for one-man bands? Thankfully, we were able to do something with them, given everyone was, essentially under so much pressure and stressed out. And then secondly, with those leads, it's just looking at the data. Where are they coming from? So how are we getting those leads in? Is there something we're doing that we're not aware of? So it's trying to find out ways in which we can leverage that data. I do remember a time actually at AlphaSights when we were running a talent campaign, and for some reason we were having interest and traffic in from 35-year-old, the demographic, say 30 plus, and we were actually targeting Gen Z. And as it happens, with these things, when you're dabbling in paid and performance marketing, we were trying to run it ourselves. And we just clicked on, one of the categories in the age section that had set us off on a completely different tangent. So also it helps to go back to your programming and your campaigns to check you've got the right profiles in place, because you could, that could also be an oversight, which is leading to you maybe targeting the wrong audience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting topic, and I get into it a lot. So it's good to hear your thoughts on it. So AI is something everyone's talking about, and I think it's changing how they create and manage their brands. Do you see, from your perspective, is this more of an enabler or a challenge when it comes to getting those cross teams to collaborate?
Yeah, I'm probably going to say something unpopular now. I think at the moment, my personal opinion is it's more of a challenge than an enabler. For me personally, and the conversation I'm having with peers in the industry is that at the moment we're still trying to figure it out, and that is a challenge rather than something that's helping us enable better solutions or drive efficiency. And I think it is, and again, I've actually got folks that I've spoken to. I went to an event last week, and they were like, they were actually using ChatGPT to figure out how to use ChatGPT and AI in their teams. And I think actually that this is a point where you have to stop and use your own context, your experience and insight within the organization, but even within my team, and figure out what are those bottlenecks today, like where are the challenges that we are facing that's are slowing us down, and then working from there in terms of like how can AI support us to speed these things up to achieve better outcomes, rather than jumping on every tool that you see advertised, whether it's on LinkedIn or through an ad. And I do have junior folks in the team that will often see something but like, hey B, we should be using this, and I'm like, hold on, we have, our focus is to increase our time to market with some of our email campaigns, so let's just focus on that. What tools are available in that space? And because you can get carried away with the noise and get lost in conversation on the topic. So at the moment I think it's just figuring out what works for you, but also what people don't talk about is the measurement and the success metrics that you put against that. And with anything, right? Whether it's AI or another tool in the stack, it's figuring out what does good look like and what is success going to look like for us, which again, you need to spend some time thinking through. So from my perspective, I think at the moment we're kind of, we're using it kind of in a few areas, but to really leverage its full potential, we need to spend a bit more time thinking through the strategy there.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. And we see lots of instances. I mean, if AI is used to automate those time-consuming, resource-heavy things that allow marketers and sales to do marketing and sales things, that's brilliant. But we see a lot of it where actually AI can be quite dangerous and negatively affect key metrics. Like if you've got AI saying to the salespeople, go after that account because I say so, but there's no detail behind it, you're just guessing, right? And we're hearing that at least 50% of the time, you're being sent off on wild goose chases, and it's actually affecting sales and marketing alignment because AI is sending them off on the wrong things. I call it AI without the why, which makes no sense, right? I mean, if you don't know why you're going after that account, you don't know what messaging to use, you're going to come unstuck. So I think AI, obviously, it's that there's so much value in it, but we've got to be careful. And I heard a really good quote. Someone said, with AI, 5% of AI technology will be on the right side of relevance, which sounds complicated, but what it is, most of the stuff is AI for the sake of AI, which doesn't really help. We'll see. We'll keep watching this space. So going back to the topic then, how do you see breaking down silos and encouraging this cross-functional effort make the brand experience more authentic, not just for customers, but also for the employees themselves?
Yeah, and I think just touching on your point earlier on around AI and the sales piece, one thing we're doing here is we're trying to build a culture that understands the value of AI rather than just pushing out a bunch of features that will help automate certain workflows within the sales process. So just to touch on it, it's something that we are facing here. We have a very young workforce where, you're always looking for ways to drive efficiencies. And so rather than putting up slides saying the dangers of AI or, make sure you hit this button before you send out the email, we're trying to educate folks on just how AI should be part of your workflow, not the focus, of your entire day, of how you speed up and make workflows more efficient. Back to your question, in terms of that cross collaboration and how you remove silos, it's communication, quite honestly, and it's bringing teams in, stakeholders in across these functions early on in that journey. So to give you an example, when I joined AlphaSights, we were in the midst of a rebrand here as well. We were moving from a, sort of single core provider in the space to really being a one-stop shop for all of, a client's expert services needs. And in that process, we brought in a number of stakeholders from the likes of product, sales. We even brought in a few customers, really not just to pressure test messaging, because that's historically how you would run a brand, transformation project and program. It was a case of actually gathering feedback from them, right? What are those pain points that we're trying to meet? What are these challenges that we're trying to solve? But also how will this messaging work in market or with those stakeholders, both in terms of what the messaging is, but also contextually when and where will they be receiving these messages? And that level of collaboration and discussion and dialogue is something, in my experience, 15 years plus, we've never done, especially in our Insight, where we did run a very large brand project. So it's not just bringing in teams for the sake of bringing them in and ticking a box and getting some feedback. It's genuinely having empathy, to your point, like understanding their perspective and being curious around how they can also help you build those messaging blocks and that architecture that's really going to resonate with all of the stakeholders that we're focused on.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. If we assume we've got comms leaders listening into this podcast, what advice would you give to move from being maybe a brand gatekeeper to acting more of a facilitator to simplify and align the teams together?
Yeah, so you touched on a word there, simplify. I think that is definitely a key. It's something I've always been passionate about. Being in the marketing and comms realm, it's all about how do we simplify complexity. And I do think that's something I would continue to flag the fly high on, is like simplify wherever you can, to bring more order to the chaotic world and marketplace that we're operating in. And what does that mean? Like, in the day-to-day tangible aspects of the role, whether you're marketing, whether you're in, communications, is do a few things well, first and foremost. But from a brand perspective, shifting from viewing, whether it's your team or those around you as brand police, should I say, brand governments, where these are the things you can say, these are the things you can't say and do, to empowering them to be brand owners. And that only comes through them buying into the brand mission and vision. Again, it's building this culture, this mindset of what your organization stands for beyond just some, a logo and a tagline. And I think shifting them from policing the brand to owning the brand is where you're going to build more authentic narratives and stories and experiences, both internally, that then will translate out into the market. So simplicity, but also changing the shift from control governance to how do you help others own the brand. It can be things like, we used to have a brand Bible here, guidelines, which was, and it still is, in the region of about 150 pages, but we have a short version that we will, send out to product owners and so on, just so they've got the core principles that they need to be aware of to go and then, have some room to authentically build out some of their material.
Yeah, I think simplification is a word I use with my team all the time. And you can see some very clever marketing things out there, but it takes 5 minutes to explain what they mean by it, which
Right.
well, you've missed the mark. So if we dig a little bit deeper into that, then can you mention maybe a couple of small, maybe powerful changes comms leaders could make that would empower their teams, maybe simplifying the brand guidelines, as you said, without losing the brand's heart, I suppose?
Yeah, I would say, like, introducing more creativity, opportunities to be creative in the team, right? I've worked for organizations, including AlphaSights here, where, we are trying to maintain our brand voice and, kind of govern kind of what our brand stands for and so on. But I think for a marketing team, we're actually in a very challenging space where we're struggling to cut through. So it's empowering your team to be a little creative within reason, and let the results speak for themselves. So it's giving, more ownership, more autonomy, or not every single project, but maybe just selecting one or two, and then having them closely monitor and measure. So for example, whether it's a social media campaign where you're creating a video, which maybe goes outside some of those guardrails you set for your corporate style guide on videos, and seeing how that performs. And we've done that here, both with, the type of content we're putting out there, but also what we're saying on it. And it has been a case of maybe asking for forgiveness here and there, because we need to try something that cuts through, because to continue doing what we're doing, the results maybe aren't delivering what they need to. So that would be the first thing. And I would say, and we hear a lot about this in terms of leveraging, your brand ambassadors, your advocates out there. We're leaning into influencers here at AlphaSights, more the focus on how do we attract more of that Gen Z pool of candidates to come and work for us. And so with that, the textbook would say you need to create some influencer guidelines. And the mandate I've set the team is keep it really loose. Let the influencer drive what they would like to talk about. I think it's inherent in a lot of comms leaders. We want structure. We want to know what someone's going to say, how they're going to say it. How do we ensure everything's on message, on point? But it's almost like trying to loosen the control, right? Maybe gradually. And that's quite hard for me, people that know me. So yeah, hopefully that inspires some of you out there just to see, what is possible if you could step away from the day-to-day oversight.
Yeah, I think you're right. And if you're looking for people who you want to think outside the box, you've got to think outside the box to hire them or find them, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's a question which I don't know whether you've been asked before, but I hear it quite a lot. If your brand walked through the building right now, would every team in your business recognize it? Is that something you hear a lot?
I've not heard that before, actually. Yeah, I haven't heard that question before, but would they recognize it? I should hope so.
And it's an interesting question because I've been asked it a few
Yeah.
times, and often I think they meaning would they recognize the logo? But what they're trying to say is, do you recognize what the brand means? So it's quite an interesting one. And as brand, I'm not a brand person myself, but it does make a lot of sense, right? If the people in your business don't get what you stand for, what
Yeah.
chance of anyone else? But
100%. And it's something that we've spent, in fact, it's something I'm really passionate about from my earlier days when I started at Insight in events, right? And kind of taking it back to running these large scale exhibitions. You are essentially creating an experience which does reflect the brand. And so to give you an example of like, do they recognize the brand? Yes, they do. But sales guys are busy selling. And so we would spend the same amount of time we'd spend, say, briefing partners on how they capture leads on the day, what their lead follow-up process would be, right through to, what they're going to have on their actual stand, as we would with sales folks, to ensure that they understood what the event was about, what our, day's program was about, and how they could delight customers that, attend on the day. Because ultimately, brand to me is, every touch point. And I think in today's world where we do have such a complex digital structure, there are so many different touch points that a client or a prospect can interact with. It's important that there is consistency and people need to be part of that, sort of, I guess, marketing mix where they don't just recognize the brand, but they know the type of experience they need to be delivering both to other employees around the business, but also to anyone they interact with, even on a Saturday night at the pub when they're talking about the brand.
yeah, and it frustrates me. I go to events and I walk around the stands and I look at the stand and I don't know what they do. And you think that's such a simple thing. Just say
Yeah.
what you do on the stand. That's the be all and end all being there, right? But
Right. Well, say what you do. So that was a challenge that I was brought in to help solve for AlphaSights, right? So we work in a very unknown industry, let's say, unless you're in the industry. We're we're expert network services organization. And we still, will often struggle with articulating what we do. If you've not worked with us, you probably won't know. And the best way we tackled that challenge, and we continue to, is through storytelling, right? So it's essentially converting something that's quite abstract into stories that actually bring to life our services. So we now equip our sales team, but even our HR and talent teams, everything from onboarding right through to like interviewing candidates on the phone with stories that actually help articulate who we are and what we do. Because, you'll say, oh, yeah, well, we provide X, Y, and Z. But sorry, can you explain what that means? Yeah, so let me give you an example of a project we worked on with a client recently. And suddenly you've got the retention, as you know, with the whole storytelling concept. So I think that's also another way to help, activate internally what that brand mission and story is to help deliver a more impactful external branding experience.
Yeah, and it's certainly better than all these stands that say, we are market leaders in XYZ. Right.
Overhead, right.
So we touched on AI, and I can tell you're a fan. But it is like topical thing right now. Everyone's talking about it. So do you use AI yourself in your day to day? And you've got an example of a use case you could share?
Yeah. So my day to day, yeah, actually, I do use it in my day to day. AI, we have an in-house version that we've developed called Delivery ChatGPT, and I use it mostly. So actually, I use it very early on in my day to help me have a more productive day. So it will be helping to organize my list of things that need to get done in order of priority, and also that includes organizing my personal life because I'm a busy mum of 2 boys, and sometimes it can get quite tricky to juggle. So, AI has access to my diary and it can figure out what needs to get done when. So that's a great way to start my day and set me up for success. And then during the day, I personally don't tend to use Delivery GPT or ChatGPT for writing, but I will turn to AI to help generate ideas. So often it's a sparring partner, or it'll be like, can you help me with this? What are the options? So often it's where it's almost like a teammate, someone in the team that you can bounce off. But I am very mindful of how often I am using it because you can get heavily reliant on the likes of ChatGPT. And at the end of the day, you haven't actually used your brain. So, yeah, I'd say it's a range of things. Honestly speaking, the odd occasion I have someone reach out to me and say they'd like me to proof a piece of communication. I'm sure the marketing and comms leaders feel this pain. And so what would have taken, my evening, I'll just put it through our system. And actually, the beauty is not just asking the platform to improve for grammar, tone of voice. It would be also to explain to me what it's changed and why.
Yeah.
Because that's important. Otherwise, you are then essentially just turning off your brain.
Yeah, I like to use it, as you say, like a brainstorming tool. Put some thoughts in there and then go
Yeah.
away with it in your head and then come up
Yeah.
with what you want to say on it. So yeah, I think it makes sense. So
Also, I'm very transparent about it as well. So again, it comes back to that culture where I know, 6 to 12 months ago, people didn't want to admit, like even in my team, that they were using ChatGPT, and it was just a case of like, oh gosh, should we be using it? But now I'll often share ideas and I'd be like, from our lovely friend ChatGPT, these are the 6 ideas. These are the 10 other taglines that we could potentially consider for this banner, just to help them along and keep them inspired and kind of pushing their thinking as well.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we shouldn't hide behind it. I think what was the saying? AI won't replace people, but people using AI will replace people not using AI. I think that's quite a good one. So you sound like someone who consumes lots of content and things in your day to day. So is there a book or a blog or newsletter, maybe another podcast you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yeah. There are so many out there. I mean, blogs, even podcasts. I mean, it almost gets to the point where you have too many. So you do have to, at some point, put a pin in them and think, right, I'm just going to listen to these 10. I would say, so I was thinking this through last night, just preparing for our session. And I'm going to actually suggest, and I'm more of a hardback reader with books. I like to just put the devices away. And I actually bought one on the weekend. It's called the Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins, which I haven't actually started yet. But I would say from a professional standpoint, a book that got released, I think it was 2016 or 2006, one of the two, by a young chap called Stephen Covey. I don't know if you've come across him. It's called The Speed of Trust. So I recommend this to everyone that ever asks me for any guidance on reading, and essentially talks about trust being the currency of business and how it's moved from just, something, a soft skill, to now being used as a way to build business advantage. And so I would recommend that book, The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey, if you haven't read it already. From a blog standpoint, one that my CEO actually recommended about 2 years ago to me here at AlphaSights is Farnam Street. So a lot of the folks around the business here are also subscribed to it. So it offers on a weekly basis a newsletter and really just helps to demystify and simplify a lot of complex mental models, which I've actually found really helpful, both not just professionally, but also personally, in sort of changing your outlook on certain challenges or situations that you're encountering, both at work or in your personal life. So Farnam Street is another one I'd recommend as a blog subscription.
Yeah, I'll definitely be checking that one out. Sounds really interesting. So you've been an awesome guest, Bee. And it's a cheeky ask. I always do this. Is there anyone inspirational in the space that you think you would recommend we should get on the podcast in future?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. There is actually one lady who I'd recommend, who I worked with for a short time at 8x8. Her name is Nerea, and she is an exceptional leader. I actually had a conversation with her last week. So she used to lead our marketing function at 8x8. So I highly recommend you reaching out to her. And why do I recommend her? Because there are very few leaders out there that I have worked with that have huge teams, that they're highly kind of, efficient with how they use their time, strategic, but also in the detail, right? Day in and day out. Like, I've never known anyone that can share as many stats and data points as this woman could, but she was invested in the detail. What converts, what doesn't. Talk to me about, communications, talk to me about PR, constantly curious, but always human. Given the highly pressurized role that she was in when I joined 8x8, she was someone that you could approach any day of the week, and it would always inspire me with new ideas and ways of delivering impact in markets. So I'd reach out to her for sure.
We definitely will. So I appreciate the recommendation. And if she says no, I'll come back to you for some. This has been a really interesting session. I know people listening in will probably have follow-up questions. And if they do, what would you recommend the best way to get in touch with yourself after this?
LinkedIn.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Nice and simple. Brilliant. So, great session, Bee. I think this is really interesting. Personally, I think we're just scratching the surface. So if you're interested, I think we could definitely get a follow-up podcast, dig a bit deeper in some of the relevant bits. But for now, thank you so much for your time. And everyone listening, appreciate you taking the time. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And don't forget, there are over 500 other episodes in the series, so make sure you check them out as well. Thanks for listening. Until then, thanks, Bee.